First off, the devs put in a few little quality of life shifts that, on paper, sound small, but in practice, smooth out a lot of squeaks. Quartzite and Marble, the kind of materials you either hoard or endlessly hunt for, now respawn on a 1-week timer, which should make resource runs feel a bit less frantic and a little more predictable when you're trying to prep for big builds or upgrades. They also snuck in some seasonal flair. St. Patrick's themed resources and items are available, so if you like poking around the world for holiday bits, there's something new to find and collect now. On the combat side, there's a neat tweak to Earwig behavior. Some of its attack patterns have been tuned so you can land a perfect block on particular strikes. That doesn't mean Earwig just becomes cuddly, but it does give a sharper timing window for players who like to parry and capitalize on counters, which can change how you approach that fight if you've been alternating between tanking and kiting it. Now for the parts that actually fix things people have been running into. The patch addresses several spawning and progression bugs that could cause real headaches. One issue where Cactus Flowers wouldn't spawn correctly for older saves has been resolved, which is a big deal for longtime players returning to their existing worlds. There was also a weird progression blocker where talking to Sloane could display a text block message and then lock you out of further progress. That's been sorted, so quests and storyline beats should flow again without getting stuck on that glitch. Multiplayer got some important attention too. Clients who were having trouble being able to sleep, yes, something as basic as hitting the sleep option and having it refuse to work, now have that fixed, which matters for people playing co-op and relying on coordinated rest cycles to trigger day-night changes or autosaves. The ORC Waves mechanic was corrected, so those enemy waves spawn in the intended scenarios rather than randomly or not at all, and that should help preserve the pacing and challenge designers intended. Also, if you'd ever been annoyed that the Cornhog didn't drop Cornhog chunks reliably, that's now fixed, so looting and crafting loops are no longer unexpectedly blocked by missing drops. Pickup improvements are small but surprisingly satisfying. Lint and Pinecone pieces were made larger and easier to collect, which means fewer frustrating moments of hovering over tiny loot that refuses to register. And for those who've been frustrated by the Ladybug doing way more damage than planned, its damage numbers were brought back in line with intended levels, so it shouldn't one-shot you out of nowhere anymore. It's the kind of balanced touch that makes encounters feel fairer and less swingy. Stability and crashes got a heap of attention, which is always nice to see in a patch that's not just cosmetic. The team patched a range of crash scenarios, including a particularly rough one where Xbox players using mouse and keyboard could crash while typing. There was also a crash tied to opening multiplayer chat in the pregame lobby, which could kill a session before it even started. That's been addressed as well. Beyond those, the update includes a handful of other hard-to-pin-down stability fixes that should make the whole experience feel more reliable across sessions. If you've been holding off because of crashes, this patch aims directly at that problem. There are also a few physics and interaction fixes that only show up when you really test everything. For instance, the croquet mallet had wonky behavior where it wouldn't fall for a client, which could look silly or break certain interactions. That's been fixed. The team also cleaned up how save load and autosave flows work with quests, so reloading a save won't mess up where you are in a mission chain. Little things like keybind rebinding being unusable have been patched, which is one of those it only matters when it happens to you problems, but can be extremely annoying when it does. I know for a lot of players, the proof is really in the playing. Does your inventory stop glitching? Do you stop clipping through something? Do a boss fight and pickup routine feel less jagged? This update attempts to hit those pain points across the board: resource cadence, enemy timing, item drops, and stability. And while none of those changes are earth-shattering on their own, together they make the game feel a lot more polished and less likely to throw you an invisible hurdle mid-session. The developers asked players to update once the patch shows up, and suggested verifying game files or restarting consoles if it doesn't appear immediately, which is typical but useful advice if your platform lags on rolling updates. If you've been juggling builds, tracking down rare materials, or annoyed at a recurring crash, this patch is the one that's trying to clean up those frictions so you can focus on the actual fun parts: exploring, building, fighting, taste, and experimenting with new items instead of troubleshooting. There's no massive new systems overhaul in this small release, but there are a handful of pragmatic fixes and adjustments that should make normal play sessions feel smoother and more dependable. That's the sort of update where, after you install it and jump back in, you'll probably notice the absence of problems you used to run into more than you'll notice flashy new additions. And honestly, that's a win for quality of life. So yeah, if you're planning to hop back in, patch your game, and give the changes a run. Watch how those Earwig windows behave if you like parrying, keep an eye out for the seasonal bits if you're into collecting, and enjoy fewer weird crashes and annoyances while you're building or questing.